Good evening and welcome to Faith in Public Life's online Women of Faith Power Summit series. Today's dialogue is Never Again, social justice, activism, and using your voice to speak truth to power in 2020. Together, our speakers today, and all of you who are tuning in, are part of a movement to lift up the moral voices of women of faith in the 2020 election. Together, we'll make this nation a place that welcomes all, values the dignity of all, and provides a safe and healthy community for all. This dialogue is organized by Faith in Public Life as part of our Women of Faith 2020 campaign. Faith in Public Life is a nationwide network of 50,000 faith leaders united for justice. We're led by bold women of faith, both clergy and lay people, bringing to bear our values of human dignity, equality, and justice into an election where all of these values are under assault. Before we begin today's panel, I want to start with a moment of silence and a prayer for all of those taken too soon from this world in this tumultuous year. From COVID-19 to the white supremacist violence that killed 2 people in Kenosha, Wisconsin, we're all burdened with grief upon grief. A moment of silence. Creator God, God of justice, we pray for healing and love, resilience and mercy. May we receive these and may we give these as leaders, as neighbors, and as a nation. Make us bearers of light that conquers darkness, the darkness of fear, the fear of scarcity, the fear of loss, the fear of the other. Make us tellers of truth, truth that calls us to action for justice, truth that tears down unholy man-made walls of exclusion and bigotry. Make us be builders of a liberated community, a community in which there are no oppressor and no oppressed, none who hate and none who are hated, where all are respected, protected, and whole. Amen. We're here today because the 2020 election is a moral crossroads for our nation. Jewish women are leaders of the journey to justice, liberation, and equality for every person. I've seen your leadership with my own eyes. I've passed the megaphone back and forth with Jewish women at many a protest, press conference, and vigil. But tonight, I am here to listen. Thank you all for coming, and now it is my honor to turn it over to our moderator, Rabbi Elizabeth Bahar.
Hi, I'm so honored to be here with you this evening as we begin our panel discussion. We have with us some amazing women who do regular social action justice work and whose work is informed by their deep and abiding faith. I'd like to take a moment to introduce all of them, and then they will all be asked questions, which I hope will help nourish all of our souls during these challenging and difficult times. Shekina Larks is a program coordinator and diversity trainer at Bechol Halashon. She holds a BA in politics from the University of San Francisco and is a native of Oakland. Rabbi Marla Feldman is the executive director for Women of Reform Judaism since 2012. She is a Reform rabbi, lawyer, and certified fundraiser. She was a previous director of the Commission on Social Action of Reform Judaism and director of development for the Union of Reform Judaism. We have also Carly Pildes. Carly has dedicated her career to fighting for justice and equality and was named one of the 2019 Forward 50 most influential American Jews. She's an organizer, advocate, and regular columnist on The Forward. Additionally, she has done a lot of organizing work, and I encourage her to share all of her organizing work with you this evening. And we have lastly, Cheryl Cook. Cheryl is the executive officer of Avodah, Cheryl first assumed the role of executive director at Avodah in January of 2015, after having served 9 years as the chief operating officer of the Jewish environmental justice group Hazon, where she played a vital role in guiding the organization through an era of significant growth. Bruchim Habaim, thank you all for coming. And I know that it's difficult to be here as Rosh Hashanah is just a few days away. So we'll start the questions off with Rabbi Feldman. And I'm just curious, what part of your faith calls you to engage in social justice work? And even more, is there a teaching or a text that you derive much inspiration from in this bold effort?
Thank you, Rabbi Bahar. Yes, it is a busy time with the High Holy Days upon us. Just by way of introduction, I'm the executive director of Women of Reform Judaism, which is the umbrella for women's groups that operate primarily in Reform congregations. And so as a network of congregation-based women, obviously what I gravitate towards is the work of our congregations. So much of that is the spiritual work, the worship, the inspiration we try to instill. We call our network a network focused on sisterhood, spirituality, and social good. And those things really come together in the work that we do. So in thinking about your question about the texts and in thinking about the High Holy Days, I would have to say that that's really one of the most inspirational series of texts are these High Holy Day messages. The holiest day of our year coming up in a little bit is Yom Kippur. And of course, that's a fast day, a day when we are supposed to be engaged in self-reflection. And our scriptural reading for the morning service, which is kind of the climax of the day, is from the prophet Isaiah. So here we are on our fast day. We're feeling a little bit hungry and maybe even feeling a little bit proud of ourselves for fasting and being in synagogue and praying and doing the spiritual work we're supposed to do. And Isaiah comes along and scolds us and basically says, oh, you got it wrong. It's not about the fast. This day is not about the fast. The day is about what the fast is supposed to inspire us to do. It's about the empathy that we hope the fast will inspire. It's about remembering that there are some who are hungry every day and not just as we are in that moment sitting in our worship services. It's about those who are in bondage. It's about those who are locked in cages unjustly. And it's about our obligation to unlock those cages. It's about our obligation to feed the hungry. And if we miss the message in the morning, we get to the afternoon worship service when we're really good and hungry. And at least in Reform congregations, this is a little different from other Jewish movements, we read from a section of Leviticus called the Holiness Code, which is a blueprint for creating a society that God would want to dwell within. So if we are going to be holy, hence the Holiness Code, to create an environment that is worthy of God, what are the things we're supposed to do? Well, the first thing we do is assure that those who are vulnerable, those who are poor, have access to the resources of the community, that they're entitled to a share of those resources. We're obligated to create a society with just business rules, with fairness for employees, a community that cares for the elderly and those who are vulnerable in our society. So throughout our holy days, we are reminded through our holy scriptures of what is important to us. And it is those values, which I would consider progressive values, that inspire me year long.
Thank you so much. And I agree with you. I think the prophetic calling, urging us beyond simple ritual and beyond the simplicity of life today, but really pushing us to have a better society, compels many, many people. I'd like to ask a similar question to Carly. Carly, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us, what texts or stories in Judaism or sacred texts really inform you in your writing, in your organizing, and in your work?
Thank you so much. Once again, I'm Carly Polis, the Director of Grassroots Organizing for the Jewish Democratic Council of America, and also a writer at Forward. At its core, I always come back to the concept of B'Tselem Elohim. That we're all created in the divine image and have the divine within us. Because if we all have the divine in us and we all have faith and love God and work to serve God, then we have to serve each other and we have to treat each other as innately worthy of dignity, innately worthy of equity, and innately worthy of inhabiting a just world. I think a lot about power and who gets it and who should have it. And a lot of my work is really based around helping people to access power, to feel powerful, and to exert our power in their democracy. Whether that's training someone how to lobby on the Hill for a program that they desperately need, work I did for many years at Results, or empowering people and letting them how they can vote and vote safely during this pandemic. I really come back to the idea that we are all have God within us and all are loved by God, and therefore all of us are innately worthy and innately deserving of dignity and of an equal stake in our society. And our society has a lot to do to become more equitable.
Thank you so much, Carly. And I love the image that you offer of B'Tselem Elohim, the idea that we are all created in the image of God and that we must work and strive to ensure all members of society, especially those on the margins, have equal access to ensure that their voices are heard. Cheryl, I turn to you, my wonderful friend in the environmental, as we look at what's going on in our environment, as we are saddened by looking out in California and out west, what really compels you and pushes you? And also, if I can be so bold as to ask, what encourages you on during these moments and times when we really need that push so hard?
Yeah, it's a hard time because there's such a, there's the whammy of the environment and democracy at stake and the pandemic and so many other things, the fires. So I'm Cheryl Cook. I'm the CEO of Avodah, and we develop lifelong Jewish social justice leaders. So what we're most known for is our Jewish Service Corps. When I think about what most compels me, I also went straight to where we are right now. We're in these weeks right before the high holidays. And the work that we're doing right now is this work, Cheshbon HaNefesh, the accounting of the soul. And I've been thinking about that in terms of the work that we do with Avodah, that a lot of our work is around first, the idea that we have to get right with ourselves, that we have to do deep reflection ourselves, and then reflect as a community to be able to create change. That change does not just happen because we make bold statements, though bold statements are wonderful, that we really need a deep understanding of ourselves, our community, to be able to create the kinds of changes, the kind of structural changes that we need to be able to create. So that is both what is driving me right now, and it is also what gives me hope, because I do see so many thinking about these questions right now. I see organizations that are not just grappling with making statements around racial justice. Statements are wonderful, but I see organizations that are actually trying to step in, maybe dip their toes in, or maybe dip their whole bodies into the hard work that is needed to start on this journey or continue on the journey of really creating a just society.
Thank you so much. And I love the idea that you offer that Cheshbon HaNefesh, the accounting of our souls, is correlated directly to Tikkun Olam, to the repair of the world. And it reminds me so much of one of the teachings that we have in Musar of Cheshbon HaNefesh, of internal reflection, of Tikkun Atzmi, as being one of the primary things that goes first before we can engage in Tikkun Olam, secondary to going out and changing the world. And we ourselves need to be in alignment so that we can further make the world in alignment. Shekhinah, of course, I didn't forget about you, and I'm so looking forward to you also sharing, if you would be so kind, as to some of the things in our tradition that really inspire you, that drive you and propel you, and encourage you in the great work of diversity and ensuring that everyone's voice is heard.
Hi, I'm Shekhinah. I am the program coordinator at Bechol Lashon, which is a Bay Area-based organization that focuses on ethnic and racial diversity within the Jewish community. So much of my work in the Jewish community is driven by the fact that we are a multicultural, multiracial people that live all over the world. And some of the principles that drive me the most around this and connect me the most to this principle is really Shabbat. And when I think of how we practice Shabbat, I think of how we practice it routinely every week, that this is not, that when we talk about race and racism, that these are not singular conversations that can be had, that these are conversations that we need to ultimately be having all the time, continuing them. Just like we do Shabbat every week, we need to be talking about race. Just like we read the Torah every week and we read it again every year, we need to incorporate those skills into our life. And, you know, I really think that the principles of Shabbat can be broken into 4 categories. One of the main directives being to rest. Rest is so important when you're doing social justice activism. You have to be able to take care of yourself. My favorite quote when I talk about self-care is, if I'm not for myself, who am I? If I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not, now when? So there's a commandment for us to not only take care of ourselves, but to also care for each other. And, you know, another really important part of Shabbat is being with community. A lot of these things don't happen in a vacuum. We have to be having social justice conversations among community. And the 2 main principles of Shabbat, Shamor and Zachor, to observe, and Zachor to listen, or maybe the other way, maybe Shamor to hear, and Zachor to observe. So when I think about my social justice activism, I have to remember to not only listen to those around me, but to also observe, listening and learning through observation are really important skills that you have to understand to do this work and engage in this work. And fourthly, Shabbat is a glimpse at Olam Haba. It's a glimpse at a repaired world. What would the world look like if it was truly repaired? And, you know, my work, the work that I do around racial justice, I hope that one day we are in a Olam Haba space.
Thank you so much. I love what you said about Shabbat, that Shabbat is not just a day of rest, but the idea that we must look at Shabbat as a learning mechanism and regularly engage in the hard work of having these difficult conversations so that eventually we can change the world and make it better. I appreciate deeply, as a woman and a mother, what you said about rest, which I think is going to push me to my next question of how, as a mother and as a woman, are we dealing with the pandemic that we are currently experiencing? And how can we learn from our sacred tradition and remind ourselves that we too must take care of us and those around us, our family and our community, and encourage them on and nourish them through our sacred teachings. And so, Carly, if it's okay, I'll ask you first. How has this been for you as a woman? And have you been able to rest? And has our Judaism been able to help you and guide you in any way, shape, and form during this very difficult time?
I have a lot of thoughts on this. I'll try to keep it relatively brief. I work 2 jobs. I work more than full time, and my husband was declared an essential worker right at the start of the pandemic. So I was left with a very rowdy 3-year-old, no childcare, and a very large workload. The best thing we did was put a slide in the middle of our living room just to give her something to do. I will say, I think it's been an enormously challenging time for me, for every working mother, for everyone in this world, in this country. But there are a couple lessons I really took from it. One is that our system is really irrevocably broken and stacked against working moms. And we need to talk about that all the time. And I think particularly in Washington, we often get pushed into this pattern of invisible parenting. You're scared to talk about, it's one thing to put a picture of your kid on your desk, but you don't want to talk about how you're overwhelmed or how you're tired or how the system is really working against you because you're scared you'll get mommy tracked. So I have tried really hard to be really open and be really loud about the fact that being a working mother in America, the odds are stacked so far against you. And that's not a personal feeling, it's a systemic one. Moms being pushed out of work hurts our economy. It hurts our kids. It hurts our health. It hurts our mental health. And talking about that on a systemic level. Beyond which, I think it's just really critical that we encourage women to ask for help. I've been at my parents' house for about a month, and I'll be going home in a couple of days. But really, so many women I know are at the edge and really facing a mental health crisis 7 or 8 months into this and feel like they can't ask for help. There is nothing in our tradition that wants you to hurt yourself mentally and physically. And I think it's just so important that women do that and that everyone does that. And lastly, I will say I have drawn a lot of strength through thinking about Jewish women on a continuum of hardship in hard times. There's so much suffering in the arc of Jewish history. And just thinking about, what my great-grandmothers went through coming to America, what women went through, literally in Pharaoh's Egypt. And there's such an incredible history of strong Jewish women. You could talk about Miriam, you could talk about Esther, who I named my daughter after. There's an incredible tradition of women who just find a way to survive and make it work. And that's really where I have drawn a lot of my strength from. Jewish women throughout history are incredible. Read about them. It will make one more day without childcare feel bearable.
Thank you so much, Carly. I think that you're amazing and very inventive for putting the slide in the living room. You rock, go you. And I will also say that I love what you have to say about mental health, especially affecting women more directly, since they oftentimes are the unrepresented caregiver, whether it's to children below them in age or older parents above them. And we struggle, I think, often with the idea of kavod av v'em, honoring your father and mother, whether it's honoring yourself as a father or a mother, or honoring those who birthed you or were in father or mother roles for you at various points. Cheryl, I was curious if you could share with us some more thoughts just on the concept and some of the ideas of what fuels us today, and how can we really use some more of where we're at, looking at some of the news that's recently come out, not just about the environment, but about women in general today, and immigrants. Any thoughts you want to share with us from that perspective of the intertwining of both?
I think what you just said was really beautiful. And I definitely feel like I share everything you say. And I just want to add that we were talking as we were preparing for this panel about Aunt B, that was brought up during the conventions. The idea of an Aunt B. And so for me, I have an Aunt B, and that has allowed me to be in the role I'm in. And I really want to say clearly that I tell people all the time when they're thinking about leadership roles that it is exceedingly hard and near impossible to be a leader of an organization and a parent and nourish both. And certainly as a woman, I think it's doubly hard, the emotional labor that is there. That's not the question you asked me, but that is definitely what I'm thinking about. I would add that I am very aware through my work at Avodah of the way that the current pandemic is playing for people in poverty, particularly, that as hard as it is for me sitting in my house trying to do my job and working with my children, it is so much harder for people who are really being hit so hard by this pandemic. And so I am really thinking deeply about that, about the Black and Brown communities that are getting hit much, much higher rates, those who are essential workers, healthcare disparities. And so I am holding on to the vision of we're all in this together, and we need to keep our eye on the ball of how we can shift resources in our role as women of faith and as leaders to be able to move resources in our community to places that need it more.
Thank you so much. And I love the idea that you have that we need to support each other, that running an organization, especially as a woman, is hard. Shekhinah, I would love if you would share with us, knowing that today, again, difficult day, very challenging set of circumstances that we find ourselves in across our great nation. Any ideas that you have? Where do you find hope, and how are you able to really proceed in your work at B'chol Lashon to really finding that issue that's going to be very impactful?
I mean, this has been a really challenging time, just period, whether we're talking about race, whether we're talking about the failures of the healthcare system, whether we're talking about this current administration. It has been a rough year. I really feel like God owes me an apology, but I don't know if I'm going to get one. So, but in my work with B'chol Lashon, what really gives me hope is talking to our youth, honestly. Some of these kids are so phenomenal, and we're really interested in doing this work, and they want to make the world a better place, and they want to be connected with people who look like them and believe like them and pray like them. And they want to exist in a multicultural Jewish society. That's what they want. And this year, we couldn't do camp in person, so we did it online, and that was a really unique experience. Most of the kids that were at our virtual session were new. We didn't know them, and it was so great to get to meet so many of them and hear their hopes and dreams for the world. They're so full of ideas, and they're just like, I just need to get old enough so that I can do the work. And we are really setting up our kids for such a bright future. And I'm so excited for what they will bring to our community.
Thank you so much. I love learning and looking at our youth. I think that oftentimes our youth can provide us that inspiration and energy. At a time, especially as you said, it's difficult and our cup perhaps feels a little bit empty. By looking toward our youth, we can feel our cups filling with their energy and their enthusiasm. Marla, I would love it, Rabbi Feldman, if you would please share any ideas that you have between the tensions you might face with your faith and social justice work that you're pursuing. And how, as a rabbi, are you able to deal with that?
Great question. I do want to just touch back on something that Shekhinah said about God owing us an apology. I think we owe God an apology because we've messed up God's world, and it's our job to fix what we broke. That said, to your question, Rabbi Bahar, for the most part, I don't feel a tension between my social justice and advocacy chops, if you will, the work that I do in that arena and my faith. In fact, it's my faith that inspires that work. That said, I have to be aware that as a director of an organization that is congregational based, it's a little different than some of the other organizations that are represented here. It's not a political organization. It's not a social service organization. It's not a network of people of one particular group or another. It's not a human rights organization. People join congregations for lots of reasons. They like the rabbi. They want their child to have a religious school education. They want a place to pray. They want a social community. Or they believe in the progressive Jewish values that the Reform movement holds when they join a Reform congregation, or all of those things. But the truth is, when a rabbi is preaching in a congregation, they have a pew full of people that didn't join that congregation to hear what that rabbi thinks about the political world today. There may be some people there who thought that, certainly not everyone. And I think we have to be aware of that we are a diverse community that has diverse political views. And when we speak with certitude about what we know God wants from us, and I'm at fault in this because I often do that, we have to be a little bit humble and recognize that there are others who know what God wants, and it is something very different. So, one tension that I feel is that I feel the pain of those who hold different religious views and feel that their values are at stake the same way I do when my values are at stake, as I understand my faith values, and yet we're complete polar opposites. By way of example, my progressive organization, the Reform Movement and Women of Reform Judaism, believes in reproductive health and rights. We believe it's a woman's right to make decisions about her own reproductive health and her reproductive decisions. But I understand that there are people of faith who feel called, and the same certitude that I have about my faith, they have about their faith. And I feel for them. We're on opposite sides. We will never agree. And we all want to bring those values to the public arena. So I would argue that it shouldn't be determined by law. It should be determined by individuals in consultation with their own medical, spiritual, family guides and consultants and whoever they choose. But again, I recognize that there are people of faith who come to very different conclusions than I do about some of these values. And some of them are in the pews where I preach and my colleagues preach. And so I think the humility that we need to bring to that is to recognize that when I speak from my tradition, I am teaching Jewish texts. I'm not Isaiah, but I'm teaching what I understand Isaiah to be saying. My role as a Jewish teacher is to do that. So if you don't like what I'm saying, if you think I'm wrong, if you think I'm on the wrong end of the political spectrum, okay, you're entitled to your views. But if you tell me that Isaiah is wrong, okay, we'll take that up with Isaiah, because I didn't write it. Isaiah did. So I'm going to teach my understanding of what Isaiah says, my understanding of Jewish texts and tradition, and hope that that inspires people and leads them to a path of righteousness, and that they bring those values with them into the world in which we live.
Thank you so much. And I think that it is incumbent upon congregational rabbis to have that broad perspective and recognize and be inclusive of everybody. We today live in a very polarized society, and it's very hard to feel and make everybody feel included, whether you're on one side of a spectrum or another politically. As Jews, we are very diverse in our opinions. 3 Jews, multiple opinions, not just 4. And so, I find it refreshing that you use the word humble. And I think that it's fascinating. And if I could go back to Shekhinah for a second, you had brought up, God, and in many ways, you're the first one who brought up God. But I would love it if you would share with us any other thoughts you have just on Jews of color and how it is that they feel comfortable and confident in the Jewish community today. And I would love it if you would also share any other thoughts that you might have of any tensions you've experienced yourself, independent, just between social justice work and our faith tradition?
So that's a lot to unpack, but like for the most part, I would say Jews of color are starting to become more of a hot topic in the Jewish community, not because we haven't always been there, but because we're now just becoming more visible. And about 20% of American Jews identify as Mizrahi, Sephardi, Black, Asian, mixed race, Latinx, or Latino, Latina, and like that's a huge and Asian. That's a huge chunk of the community, and those stories are often not the dominant stories that we hear about in Jewish life. Jews live all over the world, and we always have been we've always lived all over the world for as long as Jews have, as long as Jews have been in diaspora. And it's so important that when we talk about Jewish stories and when we talk about the Jewish community, that we're including those experiences as well. That when we talk about the Jewish people and the Jewish spaces, that we're including the experiences of Jews of color as well. And with my work with B'chol Lashon and better understanding Jews of color and like creating spaces for Jews of color, some of the tensions that I see is really more about like our understanding of race in the context of America and how that impacts our community. Because Jews are multicultural and multiracial people, we don't really cleanly fit into a lot of the racial lines that the United States has constructed. And there are Black Jews, there are Asian Jews, there are mixed race Jews, there are Arab Jews, there are Jews of every race, every ethnicity, and every category of racial ethnic identity that we can think of in the United States. So when I think about the tension around that, I think it's really rooted in the fact that we don't talk about it enough. I think that the Jewish community needs to have a lot more conversations about who we are as a people. And I think that would lead to a lot more understanding and coalition building across difference.
Thank you so much, Shahina. I love what you said, that Jews are not just one monolithic group, and that 20% of the Jewish community self-identify as Jews of color. And even beyond that, there's Mizrahi Jews, Jews from the Middle East or Middle Eastern origin. And there are Jews who look and sound very different from all parts of the world. And what a gift that is to our community, because it allows our community to have very many voices, which help elevate us as a whole. And I agree that it's times and hard that we don't necessarily talk enough about very challenging conversations. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Carly as a writer, a weekly columnist for The Forward. What do you feel like are some of those challenging conversations that you see that we as a community internally should have, and externally we should have with our broader nation that we reside in?
A couple of things. I mean, internally, I think it is so hard to balance wanting to have a pluralistic community, wanting to having spaces where people are welcome, wanting to have space where we can disagree and be in community, and also balancing dignity and real theological divergence and what those lines are is enormously challenging. It's an enormous challenge for me. Who do I want to engage with, and when am I done? Even in a space where I really like to believe that the Jewish people are mishpacha, are one family. And I push myself to really be in community with as many Jews as possible. And even though there are Jews out there who would say they hate me and I'm bad for Yiddishkeit and whatever else, I try to push myself to never hate them. Someone wrote to me recently and wrote, it would be really great if instead of writing these articles, you had a few more babies. That would be much better for the Jewish people. And I'm like, So, like, I don't really want to be in community with you, but I'm going to try really hard not to hate you like you hate me, because it's this baseless hatred, it's bad for our people. I also think, so, the tension between pluralism and love and lofty ideals of Jewish inclusivity, and where do we draw the line on dignity and on respect? I always find those to be really challenging and to come from all across the spectrum. Similarly, but different, the racial justice conversation is just so important. It's always been important. It's not new, even if it's new for some people, and welcome. Thanks for teaching yourself a bit about it. Internally, it's so critical. And I do think there are so many times where people feel like it's just too hard to hear criticism of the community, or it's just too hard to face racism, or it's just too scary. It's okay to talk about racism if we're talking about policy, if we're talking about the great lobby day we did with our multi-faith coalition, but it's not. So the conversation gets much more daunting when you start asking people to hold themselves and their institutions accountable. I'm raising a Black Jewish daughter. I have a Black Jewish husband, and people say things to me like, but I'm sure you've never had a bad experience in the Jewish community. And I'm like, well, why do you think that? Because we're friends, and because you can't bear the thought of someone being bigoted towards me or my child who you're currently playing with? That does happen to us. And I guess you could call this my refrain. We have to talk about it. We do, and they're hard conversations, and they're innately worth having. I think in terms of the conversations we have externally, I think it is really difficult for a lot of Jews to grapple with the reality. And I think theologically, Jews are really good at holding two truths in one hand, but it's a difficult thing to do when you're looking at your status in a country. So many Jews are facing rising anti-Semitism and have experienced hate crimes in their community and have very real reason to be very frightened as we see rising domestic terror in this country. And also, so many of those Jews also experience white privilege, including me. So I think, pushing ourselves to understand that and grapple with it and know that, just like Moses was a great leader, but also didn't get to go into the Holy Land. Like, lots of things can be true at once, and they're not actually always in conflict. And that's something our tradition really lives and breathes in. So sorry for the long answer, but, I think in some ways the internal and the external are similar. It's facing bigotry, it's facing silence, it's raising our voices. It's diving into the parts of our tradition that challenge ourselves to be the best people and have the best society. But the internal conversations I find are often so much more painful for people that they want to, it is easier to talk about in some ways the external. And that's why it's so critical to do.
So thank you so much, Carly. And I agree with you about what you said, that there are two truths that we as a community need to grapple with, both on one hand, the white privilege, and on the other hand, rising anti-Semitism. And I think it's profound what you spoke about also about the internal conversation that we are required to have, so that I encourage all of us to continue. Cheryl, I would love to ask you our final question of the evening, and you've got a very short amount of time, please, to answer it. What fuels you? What's going to push us? How can we move forward and encourage us to have these very difficult conversations, even around the Shabbos table, with Rosh Hashanah approaching?
What fuels me? I think so many things. So I think that the movement building that I'm seeing, the protests, fuel me. I see the fact that we're having this conversation, and the fact that so many conversations like this are happening fuel me. And I am a huge believer in to step into the messy work. So I am fueled by having hard conversations and the fact that I see so many in our community wanting to have these conversations. I see so many in our American community and in our Jewish community. So I am excited by that prospect that even in this really challenging time that we're all, sometimes I'm falling over, and yet we're all still here and we want to do the work. So I'm fueled by wanting to do the work. And I really want to say, I believe so strongly in staying in social justice work and finding ways to fuel ourselves with joy and with community and all the things that everybody said tonight. It all has to be there. But being in community where we're working towards something, right, the arc bends towards justice, I feel it. I feel like I'm part of it. I feel like we're part of it. And I am fueled by trying to move things, even if sometimes it's slow as molasses, and it is. And even if sometimes I feel stuck for a minute, I am fueled by the energy around me then, and that helps me move forward.
I want to thank all of our panelists for being amazing this evening. I feel like you have all fueled me and helped me want to continue these really challenging and difficult conversations, whether it's on racism, anti-Semitism, dignity, respect. I love the idea of reminding all of us that we're created in B'Tselem Elohim, in God's image. I love the concept that Shekhinah gave to all of us, reminding us that these conversations cannot just happen one-off, but that it is imperative that just like Shabbat comes on a weekly basis, these conversations must continue on a regular and ongoing basis. I want to thank you so much. And I would like to also let you know that we will be on standby, all of you who are watching, as next up is Rabbi Jill Jacobs from Trua. Thank you. Shana Tova Umituka. May you be blessed with a sweet, healthy, and happy new year.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much to Whitney and to everybody at Faith in Public Life. It's really wonderful to be on, and it was wonderful to get to hear the panel of extraordinary rabbis just a moment before. This Friday night begins Rosh Hashanah, which continues through Saturday, Shabbat, and Sunday. And Rosh Hashanah, as many of you know, is the Jewish New Year. It's the time that we start a new year, and it's a moment that's full of possibility, as every new year is. One of the most famous prayers that we sing during the Rosh Hashanah services says Hayom Harat Olam, which is generally translated as today. Hayom is the birthday of the world. That's what every kid in Hebrew school learns, is that today is the birthday of the world. It's a pretty classic thing to sing happy birthday to the world on Rosh Hashanah. But when we actually look at this phrase, it's a bit more complicated than today is the birthday of the world. And it actually comes from a much darker place. In the book of Jeremiah, we have the prophet saying, out of a moment of just utter despair, he says, Asher lo motatani merechem, that because God didn't kill me before birth, vatihili imi kivri, that my mother would become my grave, v'rachma harat olam, and her womb would be pregnant for eternity. So harat olam as the eternal pregnancy. Olam can mean either world or forever, eternity, for those who know a bit of Hebrew. So rather than saying today is the birthday of the world, when we say Hayom Harat Olam, we're actually saying perhaps today is either the eternal pregnancy, or I would turn it around and say that today is actually this moment that's pregnant with eternity. So this is not the birthday of the world, but rather it's the pregnancy of the world. It's the moment when the world is coming into being and absolutely anything is possible. In this moment when we're feeling a lot of despair, many of us, as we look around the world, we are living through a pandemic. We see that the west of the United States is burning. We see so many horrible things happening everywhere that it's very easy just to throw up our hands and say, you know what, this world is just terrible. I'm despairing. I'm going to go crawl under my bed. I give up. But what Rosh Hashanah, and particularly this phrasing of Harat Olam, this idea of the day that's pregnant with eternity, tells us is, no, we can't dive deep into despair. We're not going to allow ourselves to go into the place that Jeremiah went, saying, I wish I had never been born. I wish that I had just been stuck in this limbo state of eternal pregnancy because it's too scary to come into being. Instead, we're going to follow the Machzor, the Rosh Hashanah prayer book, and we're going to turn around that curse into a blessing and say, in fact, we really believe that this moment of despair can be a moment that is pregnant with eternity. Throughout, particularly the last 4 years, when we've gone through very dark moments, I found it comforting to look to Jewish tradition as a promise that a new year is possible. If you know anything about Jewish history, you know that there have been some very dark moments, there have been some even darker moments, and there have been a few glimmers of light. But throughout all of that, the Jewish people has always believed that we are in a process toward a messianic era. As Cheryl just said, we have to believe that the arc is bending toward justice, even when all signs show that we're in a very deep and dark moment. And so this moment of Rosh Hashanah, this moment of a new year, we have to really believe, this is what Judaism teaches us, that we really believe that out of this despair, a whole entire new world is coming into being. Now, we don't just wait for that world to come into being. From the moment that human beings are created, God starts telling us that it's our responsibility to take care of the world, to protect it, to guard it, to act in the world, that we're partners with God in creation. At Trua, where we organize more than 2,000 rabbis and cantors across the United States and Canada, over the last few years, I've seen extraordinary acts of courage of rabbis, cantors, and their communities believing and acting as though a new world is possible. Just this summer, we had some of our rabbi members were on the street in Portland, Oregon, as federal agents were kidnapping people off the street, and they have continued to be there as peacemakers throughout the violence. We've had rabbis with their communities going out and marching again and again, whether it's against the Muslim ban, whether it's for the rights of immigrants, going down to the border to come back and be witnesses about what has happened what is happening with asylum seekers and refugees on the border. And through the last 6 months or so of this pandemic, we've had rabbis and Jewish communities act as leaders, coming out and standing up for the rights of every single person in this country. On Tisha B'Av, on the holiday of Tisha B'Av, one of the darkest moments in the Jewish calendar this past August, we had 1,100 Jewish community members who were on Zoom and on Facebook Live making phone calls to their elected representatives to demand that non-citizen workers be included in COVID relief. And so we've seen our community, as well as so many other religious and other communities, even after we're knocked down over and over, even in our moments of despair, refuse to be tired, but continue to insist that a new world is possible and that we're going to fight for that new world, that no matter how tired we are, we're going to get up and march and we're going to act. Now, it happens that Rosh Hashanah on the Jewish calendar is this moment that is pregnant with eternity, where we can imagine a vision of a whole new world. But we actually don't have to wait until Rosh Hashanah. We're told in our liturgy imagines that the world is created anew every year, every day rather, that every day God renews the work of creation, that it is as if every day God starts over, goes back to square one, and restarts the work of creation. And perhaps today's creation can be something different than what was before. And so what I take from my tradition and what keeps me going is this idea that no matter how deep into despair we might want to sink, no matter how dark the world around us looks, that there is always a possibility of creating this world anew, creating a new vision. This has become especially clear in this moment of pandemic, when we know we can't go back to what was. We instead have to insist on a vision of a new world in which we build a country and a world that protects every single person in it, not only some of the people. And so that's a hope that I want us to take into this new year, if we're celebrating this new year. But even if we're not celebrating, let's take this promise that the world, that this moment is pregnant with eternity. This day is pregnant with eternity, and we can create whatever kind of world we believe is possible. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Rabbi Jacobs. We are so grateful to you and to everyone who participated in tonight's event. Greetings. I'm Whitney Murray Brown, and I have the incredible privilege of serving as the campaign director for Faith in Public Life's Women of Faith program. As you've witnessed tonight, the goal of this program is to really amplify the voices of women that are faith leaders and activists across all backgrounds and faith traditions as we reshape the narrative of what it really and truly means to be a faithful woman voter. To that end, with the help of our advisory council, Faith in Public Life has developed a Women of Faith 2020 platform. It's a bold and unapologetic and uncompromising call to morality, equity, and justice for every woman, everywhere. You can read and sign on to the platform and learn more about this program and some of the exciting work that women are doing across America at www.faithinpubliclife.org/women of faith. Now, be sure to tune in next week for our 4th Power Summit. We have 5 going. So 4th Power Summit. Be sure to tune in because we are going to hear from Muslim women in our Sisters of Solidarity Power Summit about how they are working to demand equality, justice, and liberation for all people. We hope you will join our movement. We hope you will attend Power Summits. We hope you'll engage with this work because we know that when women lead, change follows. And now, may the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. And may the Lord grant you peace. Thank you so much and good night.